The episode archive of Your Creative Push is now easier than ever to navigate. Head to yourcreativepush.com and click episodes at the top. There you'll see all the episodes listed by date and by genre. Every episode of YCP is meant to inspire you, regardless of your creative passion, but you can now easily find the ones that fit your creative medium when you need a little extra push. Your Creative Push, episode 242.
So many people, they just sort of wander through life as if it's a rehearsal for something else. And it's a profound moment when you suddenly go, well, okay, I've got one chance at this, and so what do I really want to do with it?
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngmin Brown, and my guest today is Matthew Quick. Matthew is an artist from Australia, and in fact, he was named by Business Review Weekly as one of Australia's top 50 artists. And in the last 5 years, he's either won or been a finalist for over 70 different major national awards. But he is a very humble guy that just kind of snuck into the Facebook group. I saw his work, I was mesmerized by it, and I was like, dude, you have to come on the show. Such a talented artist. Do yourself a favor before you listen to this interview, check out his work so you know what we're talking about. His technical skill is staggering, and what he does with his art, which we'll get into the episode, is just amazing. But in this episode, we talked about his naughty corner and where he puts paintings that are not behaving properly. We also talked about those difficult periods of time in which he forgets how to paint and how he gets through that. One of my favorite things that we talked about was the importance of the titles and descriptions of his paintings and what they can do for the communication with the viewer. This way of letting them tell themselves their own story, but kind of nudging them in the right direction. We talked about his frozen pea moment. I won't say anything more about that. I'll let him tell that story. But we also talked about how he made his transition into being a full-time artist. Matthew discusses his balancing act of creating what he wants to create for himself and what he needs to create for money and the struggles involved with that, and also the beauty in finding stolen moments and the kind of romance of that and how those little stolen moments can really add up to something big. We got to a lot in this episode. I feel honored to have had Matthew on the show. Like I said, he's a super talented artist, and I really do appreciate him coming on the show. So please, without further ado, enjoy my conversation with Matthew Quick. Matthew, welcome to the show, man.
Hi there.
So I was wondering if we could start out like we usually do with you just kind of giving a brief bio, kind of a background of how you got to the point you are today, creatively and artistically.
Sure. Well, I've always been an artist of varying kinds, but I took many different forms in the past. So, I wanted to be an illustrator originally. Well, actually, no, I always wanted to be an artist, but I went down a conservative path financially because I thought I needed to make a living. And so I did illustration, and that sort of evolved into graphic design, and that somehow evolved into writing novels and then moving into advertising. And sort of after a sort of fairly circular route, I became a full-time artist as a painter mostly, but I also do sculpture as well.
Yeah, you call yourself a conceptual realist, which I like, and that means that you paint things like they actually are, which for people who don't know your work or haven't seen it yet, like they definitely have to head to the show notes page today at yourcreativepush.com/Matthew Quick to see your work, because it is like photorealistic. Like I thought you were a photographer when I first saw your work, which I guess just shows how much time I'm sure that must take for you to get to that point.
Yeah, they certainly do. I mean, if a painting's going really well, it's probably about 17 days, but I just completed a big one, and that was, I think, 58 days.
Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. It was 2.5 meters high though. It was massive. It was like, a hell of a lot bigger than me.
Right. Well, that's certainly a huge time commitment. Does that ever kind of stop you in your tracks when you know the amount of time that a particular piece is going to take you, especially having had a lot of practice doing this now, like you kind of know exactly what you're in for. So does that ever kind of stop you in your tracks?
No, not really. I mean, I think if I'd known how long it would take, I'd still do the picture. I mean, that picture, it had a sort of 2.5-year gestation that I had planned it and sort of been working towards, and had many thwarted beginnings before I actually got on to actually make it. So it certainly wouldn't have prevented it. I pretty much know how long things are going to take, and you just take that into consideration in your life. But that said, I do work 7 days a week at the moment, so I have no life.
Well, does that ever get in the way then? Having no life, like knowing the amount of time again that it's going to take you to do something, does that cut into your social life then?
Yeah, it does a bit, but I mean, this is a choice that I've decided to make, and it's only because I had a whole bunch of things go wrong earlier in the year with sort of pictures not working out that I sort of had time slip away from me. If everything had gone perfectly and smoothly and ideally the way it never actually does, then I would be in quite such a rush that I am now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What were some of the hiccups?
Weirdly, I had a couple of weeks where I just kind of forgot how to paint. You do this thing for years now, and you think, well, I kind of know what I'm doing. I've got a handle on this thing, and then it just did not work. I just had things just, they were terrible, and I sort of got to the point where I took a painting, unstretched it throughout the thing, restretched the same stretcher bars, repainted it, and I got to the same position I was in before, where it was just looking like dog's breakfast.
Now, when you get those points where you forget how to paint, I think a lot of people can relate to that, where the creativity or the technical skill just isn't like coming to you. What do you do to get through that, except for just like trying over and over again?
Yeah, I think distance is a good thing too. You need to sort of leave it. So the painting's in the naughty corner in my studio. I have a corner where there's some pictures that are facing the wall, and some of them have been there for a couple of years, and so this one is there waiting its time, biding its time until I can confront it again and make it happen. And I've heard of many professional artists who have these pictures, but they have something that is there for 7 or 8 years, just pending, and then they'll sort of have a moment of inspiration with it or something like that, and they'll come back and it'll come together. And I also know that when I was writing novels, it was the same sort of thing, that I'd write my first couple of drafts and think, okay, I've kind of got a handle on this thing, I've got it together. And then I'd be writing through it again and doing one of the rewrites, and I'd come across a profound change that would completely take the work into a different direction, and for the better in a considerable way. And then I used to kind of panic later on that I think, well, what happens if that doesn't come? Because, at the time in the earlier drafts, I thought, oh, this is pretty good, until you realize that, no, it was actually pretty ordinary, and I needed that sort of fundamental change. So just the reworking in time and a little bit of perspective, and not being quite so precious about it as you are the first few times round, it all kind of helps in resolving these various issues.
Right. Right. The naughty corner is always a good place to put your creativity on hold whenever it's not behaving. I like that idea. Well, could you talk a little bit then about your writing background? Because I know that, you've had a bit of success in the past with your writing. You really tell a story with each painting, but you also, as you publish these paintings, for the viewers, you actually give a really nice short, succinct description that's kind of like shows the cheekiness of what you're doing. So can you talk about the importance of writing about each piece?
Sure. I think I often see paintings and works in galleries where they'll just have untitled with it. And for me, that seems a little disappointing in a way. It just seems like it's incomplete, as if they haven't really considered it. And perhaps it's partly my background in advertising, that with a good ad, you'll have this thing where you have a terrific headline and a boring image, but it's the combination of these two things together. Or you'll often have a great image and a straight headline. You often have these contrasts between the two of them. And so for me, the title is really important with the work, because it will often take the work to, you get one thing when you look at the work and you'll say, okay, I can't get what this is about. And then you read the title and go, oh, that's different. I hadn't expected that. And then the third layer is the explanation. And I try and write something that is, there's the anti-art speak, because there's this whole thing about art speak where there's like an inversely proportional. The more waffly the thing is, the inversely proportional it is to the profundity of the actual work. And it's a whole genre, weird literary thing in its own right, that, I can read these things and some of them are just so incomprehensible. I have no idea. And I'm working really hard. I'm not thinking about it. I'm really, really concentrating on these things. I have no idea what the artist is trying to say. And so when I write these things, I try and write it like I would maybe a piece of advertising copy, or just a little short story, something like that, where you have a sort of a pithy opening line and you try and impart a lot of information in a clear and entertaining way, and then a really sort of sharp, snappy closing line with it. And the whole thing, if you can tell a story in 2 or 3 paragraphs, that hopefully it takes the picture to a direction that you hadn't originally, or the viewer hadn't originally anticipated, then in that case, I've done my job.
Right. It's almost like you give them just enough food to like nibble on, to like kind of go on like their own kind of story with your painting. But like kind of like the way that you describe your pieces, it's like you give them like a little bit of a hint as to where they're supposed to go, rather than like completely defining it for them. Like you said with that art speak, saying exactly what they're supposed to think about. Like what are they called? The wine, the people who taste wine. I forget what they're called.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
But they're like, oh, you're supposed to taste this like earthly thing that tastes like worms and chocolate and Reese's Pieces. Like, you know what I mean? Just very specific things that like kind of almost takes away from the experience, because you're just trying to think of all of these specific, very specific things that you're supposed to be feeling or thinking. And I think that what you do is like really perfect. It's just the perfect amount of description, yet just really kind of telling an extra story to kind of nudge them in the right direction, to really kind of pique their interest and open their eyes to look at it in a different light.
Yeah, there was a book that I read a long time ago. It's actually a children's book of all things by Chris Van Allsburg, who's the guy who wrote Jumanji and The Polar Express and a whole bunch of other things. And it's one of his lesser-known books, but I think it's terrific, and it's called The Mysteries of Harris Burdick. And if I can just go on about this for a second, it's incredible because it... what it is there's on a double page you'll have an image on one side, and on the other side it's just a heading and a single line of text. And the idea is that the kids who've got amazing imaginations, they will write their own stories. So, for example, there's one which is this cathedral with all these great big shafts of light coming through these high windows and so forth. And way up high under the canopy of the roof, there is a picture of a nun in a chair. And that's it. And then on the other side, that says the 5 chairs. And then the line underneath it is just the 5th one landed in France. That's it. And it's just, immediately go, oh, okay, well, why is there a floating nun in a chair? And what happened to the other 4 nuns? And did they fall out of a plane, or did they float up from the ground? And automatically you, the viewer, start to write the story. And it's just a terrific thing. And so with my works, I wanted to have something which I can try and sort of capture a similar type of aesthetic where you intrigue the viewer, but they start to write their own stories as well. Right.
And that's, I think, one of the best parts of art. It's that communication that you have between the artist and the viewer, that kind of transcends time. Like, you don't even have to be in the same place as the person in order to have this kind of communication, or for them to kind of open up their own imaginations. And when you're able to kind of tap into that, I think that's like the special sauce of what makes a really good artist or communicator, or both.
It's a wonderful thing. I mean, this is one of those things. Maybe it's ego speaking here, but because this goes on without you being present, and it's going to go on beyond your own life, it's going to go into the future. And so this is a conversation between the artist and the viewer that's going to sort of trickle down the centuries. And it's a wonderful thing when you think of it in those terms, that it's going to be around like that forever, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and especially with like sculptures. Well, and I guess we could get into your art, especially like Monumental Nobodies, which is a series you did. Could you maybe explain that for the listeners?
Sure. Monumental Nobodies is a series of paintings of sculptures, but each sculpture has got a thing with it that kind of changes it and sort of adds a layer of mystique or intrigue with the work. And my trigger point from this was actually watching the Saddam Hussein statue being pulled down in Baghdad at the end of the war, and sort of this thing about the soldiers going there and destroying existing art. And I was thinking about that in terms of the historical context, that really nothing had changed between now and 2,000 years ago when the Goths and the Visigoths went into Rome and sacked Rome, except there's one kind of profound difference, and that is that this was done for the TV cameras. It's not as if these were just uneducated barbarians. This was a conscientious decision to destroy art. And so it got me thinking about empire and art and the sort of works that are left behind. And so in the beginning of the series, I was trying to do these things about these statues and what would happen once the empire for which they were created no longer existed, and how do you show these sort of longevity of works and things like that. And so I did these pictures of like Queen Victoria statues with laundry hanging off them and things like that, which is based on a statue in Penang, which these days, this woman who was the most powerful woman in the world, most powerful person in the world, actually, I should say. These days, that statue's got a basketball court next to it, and the hoop is basically sticking out the back of her head, and there's balls bouncing off the back of her head. And it's just a sort of really humbling outcome for someone who was just so incredibly powerful. But that's history. And so I was intrigued by that sort of thing. But as I worked along the series further, what I found is that it changed really profoundly, not only the historical nature of the statue, but also the thing that was actually with it. It changes the way you look at that as well. One statue which had this sort of 18th century French nymph woman, and I put the Playboy bunny ears on her. And the idea with that is that the Playboy bunny icon is just so ubiquitous that you kind of forget. I mean, people have this as tattoos on their body and stickers on the back of their car and things like that, and you kind of forget what it actually means. But as soon as you put it on this 18th century statue, you realize exactly how demeaning and profound this thing is, and you sort of look at it with very fresh eyes. And so it changes not only the historical context of the statue, but the contemporary item as well. And so I've had a lot of fun with this work, sort of just trying different things and sort of marrying up these ideas of having like Pocahontas checking out her iPhone and things like that, and sort of taking it to unusual places so that you just look at the contemporary world with fresh eyes as well.
So all of these pieces really do make a statement, and you literally do, as we were talking about before, make an artist statement with each piece. Is there ever any hesitancy to kind of make like such bold statements, to really have your own opinion put out there as an artist?
A little bit, and sometimes when I've had people kind of wander past the studio and have a look in, and they would tell me a story about what that particular piece means, and let's go, oh, actually that's pretty good, that's better than what I had. So I'll adopt that story because it's far better. But sometimes you just want the viewer to just enjoy the work for what it is, and I don't really want to say anything kind of too profound, but it depends. I mean, because there's 60 works, there's 60 paintings in the series, and so some of them are sort of very serious, important works, and some of them are just a bit of fun, and they're varying degrees of frivolity or seriousness and sort of political statement with them. Right.
And then I guess as an artist, and then I guess we could use this series, since we're talking about it, as a particular example. How do you get your ideas? Do you start with a sculpture, or do you kind of start with the cheeky idea that you have? Which kind of comes first, and then do you have it all planned out before you spend all the time drawing the technically sound sculpture before you kind of put a traffic cone on top of it?
It depends on the work. Like some of it, I might have a statement that I really want to make, and so I've thought about it a lot, and then I'll try and find a sculpture that is appropriate to actually illustrate that particular message. And some of it, I'll see the work and it just lends itself to it. Like when I was in the Met in New York and I saw the Pocahontas statue and all her clothes fall off as she's actually holding a cross in the original statue. And so supposedly this is the point where she is converted to Christianity, and you become nude, apparently, when that happens. At least it does in this sculpture. But it was just so, the way she was holding it was just so perfect for her doing a selfie and everything. And so I just saw that and I knew immediately what I needed to do with it. And so it comes from both ways. Then having worked out an idea, then I'll do a series of drawings, or often I'll do a lot of work in Photoshop. And the item that I'm going to add with it, I'll try and marry up the lighting correctly and the angles and so forth so that everything fits correctly together. And so, once I actually transfer the image to the canvas and start painting, I know pretty much exactly what I'm doing with it.
Now, I think for people listening, especially like hearing you and how confident you are with, your series of work, and you've been doing this for a long time and you're super talented and everything like that. But you and I were talking before about your frozen pea moment. So I was wondering maybe you could take us back to earlier in your life, earlier in your career, and talk about that.
Yeah, well, I was doing graphic design, and once upon a time, and I really liked graphic design when I was doing it, and I enjoyed sort of all aspects of the things and going away and doing photo shoots and working on fashion and all that kind of stuff. But there was one particular thing. I was designing packets of frozen peas, and there was a time, once upon a time, when designing that was enough. I wanted to design the most beautiful packet of frozen peas in the world. But I had been working on my second novel for ages, and I had a deadline which was pending to try and sort of finish that off, which, to try and rush a novel, it just doesn't happen. Like, you a novel takes as long as it takes, and you can't just make it happen quickly. So yeah, I was having to do these frozen peas, and I sort of was looking at this thing and just I do not want to do this anymore. It's just seemed incredibly banal, and so yeah, I called that my frozen pea moment when I realised that my destiny was no longer this, and it had moved into something else. And not only that compounded with another thing too, and that is that in my early 30s, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I was told that I only had 5 years to live. And so suddenly you're going, well, if the clock is ticking, what do I really want to do with my life? And frozen peas was not it. And so it's suddenly having that clock ticking in the background, it makes you really consider quite carefully about how to use your time and about wasting it, and sort of making things, just doing things that are important to you, doing what you really love. Because, so many people, they just sort of wander through life as if it's a rehearsal for something else. And it's a profound moment when you suddenly go, well, okay, I've got one chance at this. And so what do I really want to do with it? It's got to be something that is important to me.
Right. And for listeners, you are now cancer-free, correct?
Yes, correct.
That makes me very happy, and congratulations. I'm very happy that that is passed, man. But I think that it brings up a kind of an important lesson that hopefully people don't have to experience that type of kind of a life-changing news to really establish what's important in your life, but hopefully they can take a lesson from your story and realize that what they're doing, maybe they don't like, maybe they could have independently that frozen pea moment to decide what's really important to them. So how were you able to then transition from that when you had that frozen pea moment? I can't stop saying it. But like where you realize this just isn't for me. I hate doing this. I don't like it. Like my heart's not in it. How do you then transition to find the thing that you actually do care about?
Given that the clock was ticking, it actually was quite a gradual transition. I mean, I'd forgotten about how much I loved life drawing while I was a student. So I went and did that, and I thought that was terrific. And amazingly, though, it's not like riding a bike. Like you lose the hand-eye coordination. So I did a huge amount of drawing for a couple of years. I was going 3 times a week and spending all weekends drawing. And then after I sort of was comfortable with my drawing skills, then I thought I can try and put paint to canvas. And so I gradually started doing that. And it took a long time to move completely to becoming full-time as an artist. But it started with, basically I was doing in the beginning something like 10% painting and 90% design, and then sort of about 50-50, and then 80%, 20% the other way, and now it's 100% being as an artist. And that whole transition probably took around about 6 or 7 years.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that people need to realize is that, even if you do have this kind of sudden realization of what is important to you, in order to get to that point where you are, number one, comfortable with your technical skills, and number two, able to either make a living from it or able to kind of have your life balance with it, it does take a long time, and to be patient and see it as a kind of a long-term transition.
But there's a lovely thing too about stolen moments. Like when I was doing it, when it was like 80-20 the other way, where I was doing 80% design, and I'd sort of finish something. It's like, I just got 2 hours, and my studio was a few blocks away, and I'd walk up there, and I'd only, by the time you laid out your palette and everything, it was almost time to sort of finish up. But whatever stolen moments I could get, I would do it. And I remember hearing a story with a podcast I was listening to about this writer, and I think he was selling photocopiers, and every lunchtime, instead of going often with his other photocopier salespeople and just having lunch with them, he'd go to this park, and he'd have 1 hour, and he would write in the park. And over a course of about 18 months, he managed to write a novel in these stolen moments. And this novel was published, and did quite well. It's a science fiction thing, and now he's a professional full-time writer. And I just think it's a terrific story for this thing of just sort of gradual application, and to climb a mountain, you've got to take a single step, and it's one step at a time, and all that kind of stuff. And realistically, when it's such a big task to like completely transition your life, or to try and invent a whole new career, it's really daunting thing to think about when you're looking at it from the outside. But just one drawing, or doing a little bit of painting, or just one stolen moment here, one little hour, is easy. You don't have to think about the whole thing, because it's just these small steps. But if you do enough of them, you realize that you've actually traveled a really long way.
Right. And do you think it's almost easier then, or like even more, I guess, romantic to have those, like those stolen moments? It almost takes the pressure off a little bit more when it's not 100% of your life. It's not the thing that you have to wake up and spend your entire day doing. It's like trying to find that little amount of time. Do you think that almost makes it easier then to pursue that creative passion when it's not even more than 50% of your life?
Yeah, I think you're right with that one. It can be a bit daunting. I mean, there is this thing when you're actually doing it all the time. It's like, well, I actually have to make this work. I have to go and make a living out of it. I've got to find a gallery and sell and all the rest of it. Whereas when you first start out, the pressures are quite different. You're just saying, well, I just want to do this because I like it. And then the next stage is, well, I want to make a good picture. And then it's like, oh, well, I want to make a bunch of them so I can have a show. And then I want to sell them, and then I want to get a good gallery, and it keeps evolving as you go along. And the next stage up is you're like, I'd like to have a really good gallery, and then I'd like to sell internationally. And each of these things are these incremental steps. But in the beginning, all you want to do is just like, well, I make something nice. I want to make something that pleases me and makes me happy. There's nothing too confronting about that. It's just a nice thing to do, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Would you say there are some things that have that you've learned throughout your career, some of the resistances that have either come and gone or kind of crept in and now you find yourself dealing with on a daily basis?
I suppose one of them is a bit about doing what I think is going to sell versus what I actually want to do. And I have this thing, because I work in these quite long series, and at the beginning of each series, I tend to do a few different pictures. And what has happened in the past is that I have a really quite clear idea about what I thought I was going to do. And so I'd make a couple of works in that thing, and I sort of had the whole next year planned out. And then they didn't generally work out particularly well. And so then I'll do the picture that I actually want to do. And once I did that, I said, well, that kind of worked. And then I'll do another one and another one. And that actually becomes the thing that I had planned. And this happened in each of the last of the big three series that I've worked on, that it was the secondary thing that sort of took over. The important thing with that is just do it. Like you can't overthink it too much. You just have to actually put the hours in and do the work. Once it's there, then at least you can step back and look at it objectively and try and work out what it is that is working with it or not. But if you try and second guess the audience too much, I think that is a dangerous path, because in a way it would just take me back to what I was doing before, where I'm doing frozen peas because it's for a client. And that's the whole reason I didn't get into this in the first place. I mean, I did it because I want to do what intrigues me. And thankfully, it turns out that, the things that intrigue me also resonate with other people. And I think if you're true to yourself, then hopefully there will be a voice that will connect with other people as well.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a common thing, is that overthinking the audience. And, I think that you give the perfect advice there is to just do what resonates the most with you, even if it is that secondary thing that surprises you. And it's like, hey, I'm better. I'm the good choice. Put the other thing in the creative corner, the naughty corner, and work on me, you said that this has happened with your, like, the past three works. Like, are you like looking for it now? Are you like, oh, as a second thing creeps up, are you like, yep, this is going to be it? Like, do you start to recognize that this other thing is kind of trying to take over?
Yeah, although it's a kind of a gradual thing too, because initially, I mean, because you're working one picture at a time, so you do a picture and go, well, okay, there's something in this, and I think I'll do another one. But generally, I work with a reasonably tight brief for myself about what actually I'm trying to do. But the brief hasn't written itself yet. Like, it might take a few pictures, and so for example, with the Monumental Nobodies one, there are no people in any of the statues, because partly I don't want to have gender as part of it, and I don't want to have fashion as part of it, because I want these things to be completely timeless. They have to exist in their own space, and it could be any time between when the statue was made and any time in the future. And if you put people or fashion or clothing in there, then it's going to make it of a particular time. But I didn't know that in the beginning. So there's a couple of paintings I did which had people in there, but I hadn't realised what that meant yet. So those pictures got thrown away. But it takes a little time to resolve the actual structure of what I'm doing. But that's a good thing, It's a process of discovery.
Absolutely. And we've already talked a little bit about how long these pieces take. So then, how do you balance your time then when knowing how much time each piece is going to take, but also balancing all the other things that we've talked about, like the business aspect of it, and trying to catch up with emails, or trying to sell your work, or get in galleries and stuff like that. How do you balance all of that?
Yeah, it's a little tricky. I mean, the whole business of sort of doing social media and all that is incredibly time consuming. But with the gallery aspect, I mean, I have a few galleries now, and there is a whole team there, and so I rely on the teams of people there to do their job. I mean, and there's a nice delineation because, my job is to make the work and their job is to sell it. And so I can step back a little bit from that aspect and let them do their thing that they do best. And, they charge handsomely for it, but, I recognize that that's a skill that they have in selling it. And it's very difficult to, well, I should say I find it quite difficult to sort of talk your work up. Maybe it's an Australian thing that we're not meant to be to praise yourself too much. Whereas if it's someone else's work, it's a completely different thing. And so, I mean, they can sell it and say that you're a genius and all the rest of it. So they do their stuff. But it's trying to get the whole balance. It's a tricky thing, and especially when things take quite as long as they do. One thing I did learn in my last series, because I had a terrible rush at the end, and I was working on about 7 pictures at once. And the deadline was just there pending all the time. And as I got closer and closer to towards the deadline, and these pictures, they were all sort of moving towards the end, but none of them were finished. And I got to a point where it was about 2 weeks away from the end, and they were still completely unfinished. And I had a bit of a meltdown moment right at the end. My one really profound piece of learning with that was to just do them sequentially, like finish some of them off, so that if you do get to the point towards the end where you are running out of time, at least it's only one picture that you're not going to finish, not 7 of them. And that was a lesson well learned. It was quite painful towards the end. I was putting in crazy hours to make my last show.
Right. There's an extreme power in shipping in being able to have something done and not only cleared off of your list of things to do, but just off of your mental queue,
Oh yeah, crossing something off a list is a wonderful experience, and I'm really a big one for lists. Especially when you're building up to the show and you're trying to do PR and do press and get newspaper interviews and podcast interviews and all kinds of things. And so I write everything out, and I sort of have these long lists of this is what I'm going to do in a day. And another thing too, which is quite good, is to try and be realistic about what you can and can't actually achieve in a day, and not to beat yourself up too much if you don't actually do that day's work in the day, because there's always tomorrow.
Right. It's trying to have, make your list, have it, check it twice or whatever. Find out who's naughty, find out who's nice to put in the corner, but also to not be too hard on yourself when you don't get to those things, but just move it on to the next day, to find that balance where you're hard on yourself, but not too hard on yourself. Yes,
absolutely.
Well, what's next for you?
Well, I have a show in mid-November, so I'm working on a whole new body of work, and it's quite different stuff than what I've done before. It's actually trying to put together all of my previous careers, because this is like my 6th career that I'm doing now. So I wanted to use something where it uses a sense of design. It uses some of the writing skills, so there's text in the work, as well as concept work from doing advertising. So it's basically I'm doing something about advertising, but I'm doing paintings that, I'm imagining crazy products, and then what would the ads be that would sell these things, and I'm trying to paint those ads. But as well as that, I'm working with different materials, so I'm doing these paintings on polished aluminium and polished copper. So they're just getting to understand what these surfaces can and can't do, and the slippery nature of these materials, and also the fact that they buckle too with heat and temperature and things like that. It's been quite a process of discovery. So my next show is mid-November, and I'm under the pump to get it done in time as well.
Well, that's so cool though. Do you ever then regret when you start doing something that requires somewhat of a learning curve to it? Are you ever in the middle of it and things just aren't going right, and you're just like, damn it, why did I challenge myself in this way?
Yeah, I do, of course, all the time. But so I suppose it's one of those things you're meant to evolve as an artist, and this thing, these materials, the copper and the aluminium, because they're all shiny and they're sort of very slick and polished, and it sort of lends itself conceptually to this message that I'm trying to do about the blinged up everything. And so as a concept, it's kind of tidy, And so it's a necessary step that I needed to do in order to go down this path.
Matthew, before we get to the final push, I was wondering, did you have any resources, any kind of books that have helped you along the way that you think might help some of the listeners?
Just in terms of the business of being an artist, there's a book called Art/Work, and it's really very thorough in the way it approaches just talking to galleries and sort of constructing your day as well. And a lot of the things about paperwork that you need to do, which I know it sounds totally boring, but it's, there's so many stories of these really successful artists that get ripped off by various things. And so having a contract, and there's some sample contracts in there that you need when you're talking with a gallery, and just keeping track of the work, because you send things out and you sort of, if you've got a lot of work out all over the place, it's very easy to lose track of where they are, and consignment notes and getting people to sign off things because, some galleries steal things and all kinds of stuff like that. It's a good book, and I thoroughly recommend that one as for the business side of being an artist.
Very cool. And we'll have that linked up then in today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Matthew Quick. And Matthew, before we let you go, it's time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
So my final push is to make the best work you can. Don't settle. Really, it's important to try and refine your skills. And I'm talking in this context about talking to commercial galleries. It's not so much just doing the work you want to do, but in terms of talking to commercial galleries, I think you need to refine your skills as much as you possibly can before you're doing that. Because the thing is, if you approach one and they say no to you, there's a huge gap before you can go back. You need to make a whole new body of work. It might be a couple of years. The city that I live in, there's probably about 5 galleries only that are the galleries that you can make a living out of. And so if you approach them before you're ready, then it's going to be a long time before you can go back to them. So it's about just polishing skills until you're really happy with where you're at, and then go in and talk to them. And the other one thing is about just going to exhibitions and talking to artists and talking to the galleries and curators and get to know them and get to know what they like. And so that when you do approach those galleries, you understand what they actually are interested in, and you're not actually wasting your time and theirs. And there's another thing too about just being humble about your relationships with these people. And I have an example where there's someone I know that they were introduced to a really good gallery. It's a gallery that you can kind of make a living out of. And that relationship has not happened in the end because they just kind of acted a little bit too entitled and a little bit disrespectful of the process of talking with them. And so this is just a standard life thing. It's about being respectful of the people that help you along the way and making it kind of work, because it's a team effort, and the people around that you can help you don't take their sort of help for granted, because we're all in the same team here. And so it's about being mindful of the other artists that are around you and the people that can help you along the way. Because it can come up and bite you if it doesn't work out. Sorry, that's a really negative note to finish on. No. But it's about the quality of the work, and do the very best work you possibly can.
Absolutely. Well, we want to be respectful of your time, so we just thank you so much for coming on the show today and for giving us that push, man.
You're most welcome.
And you can find Matthew on his website, which is matthewquick.com.au. On Facebook, he is Matthew Quick Art, and on Instagram, he is Matthew Quick. And we'll have all that, again, linked up at today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Matthew Quick. Matthew, thanks again, man.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Huge thank you to Matthew once again for coming on the show. Quite a few things that we got to in this episode, but 3 that I really wanted to touch on real quick before I let you go and get to your own creative work. And the first actually has a lot to do with that. It's finding those stolen moments and how those stolen moments can really add up to something big. So often we tell ourselves that we do not have enough time in the day to get to our creative passion. But like Matthew was saying, just finding those little moments throughout the day, like if it's a lunch break or if it's just 10 minutes before you go to bed, if it's 10 minutes earlier than you usually wake up, finding those little moments, and they can really add up to something big. And something that's going to help you in that is the second thing, is to go in sequential order with the things that you're doing. Maybe not sequential order, but not having too many plates spinning at once. There's such a value in being a shipper, getting things done, and having a finished product. And I know it's tempting to move on to the next shiny object. You have so many ideas floating through your head. Make sure you write them down. We talk about that all the time. Make sure that those ideas are secure for the future. But finish the thing that you're doing right now instead of moving on to the next thing, so that it doesn't stress you out when you have all of these things going on, especially if you are working on a deadline. Being able to cross things off of your list, whether it's a physical list or a mental list, is so important. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on is really important as well, because I think sometimes I do encourage you to put yourself out there and put yourself into the dream opportunities that you want to have in your life, in your creative life. And if that is reaching out to a gallery, your dream gallery, make sure that it is the right time to do that. Absolutely go for every opportunity that you want to go for in life. And absolutely, I think that some of us, myself included, wait longer than we have to try to make those dreams come true. But make sure that you're not blowing a future opportunity if the time is not right yet. It's a tough balance to figure out, and something that we're going to definitely explore more in this show. But try to be as keenly aware of your own skill set as you can. Definitely push yourself to go for those big opportunities, but make sure you are also pushing yourself to be the best artist, the best creative person that you can be, to get those skills kind of up to snuff. And I think that the magic formula for figuring that out is to surround yourself with other like-minded creative people that you trust their opinion, that can be honest with you and won't put you down hard, but will tell you the honest truth about where you need to improve in your skills. And of course, the invitation is always open to join the Your Creative Push Facebook group if you want to get some honest critiques, some respectful opinions of anything specific that you have with your work, whatever your work may be. It's a group of sweethearts, and we will be very respectful to any questions you have or anything that you need help with. Or if you just want to show off and share what you were able to push past your resistances, push past all of the things that have held you back. On Fridays, we always share our work in this big creative explosion of happiness. So you can definitely look for that every Friday. If you haven't joined yet, you can get there at yourcreativepush.com/group. Or if you've joined already and have been a little bit scared to maybe share your work or to ask for help, now might be the time. On Monday's show, we have Drew Brophy. Drew's wife, Maria, was on the show back in episode 239, not too long ago, just a couple weeks ago. And she provided such an amazing episode, we decided to make it a family affair and get Drew on the show to talk about his journey. Such an inspiring story that gave me goosebumps a million times. If you want to check out Drew's work, you can find him at drewbrophy.com, or on Instagram, he is at drewbrophy, and we'll have that linked up in today's show notes page, as well as everything else we talked about at yourcreativepush.com/242. But that is all I've got for you today, so hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we will be here for you on Monday if you need the push again. My thank you again to Matthew Quick for coming on the show. Such a pleasure. I love you all. Go get some amazing work done, and we will see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.